Hello everybody. Hope you guys are doing well. So today we would be starting with so basically we'll be going back to Swift and we'll be seeing some code repositories, right? So before that, um let us see some architecture and then we will go on from there, right? So first thing that we are going to see is some architecture and then we'll see how those architectures are getting implemented, right? So there are different types of architectures that we have. First is the uh, like MVC architecture, or it is called as a model view controller. Then we have um, MHP architecture as well. Or there is something called as MPH architecture. Okay, so let's see MVC architecture. Okay, so first we'll see MVC. So MVC basically stands for uh, model view controller, right? So, or it is also called as MVC. Now we'll try to understand the um, details, like what does M contain, what does view contain, and what does C contains, right? Okay. So the thing, so basically, so the model is basically a representation of our data, right? So model basically indicates data. For example, we'll be having core data. Then we can have one more thing, like for example our structures. So any data basically will come in our model, right? Then is my view, right? So view is basically the user interface that we are going to build. So basically what we would be doing is we would be creating separate files, right? The whole the whole process is basically to have separate files. So this is our, suppose this is our project, right? So if this is our project, then if you are following the MVC architecture, what we are going to do is, so first we are going to have a file in which all our networking, for example, if you are making a network request, if you are getting a data, or if your core data is basically where we are storing it, whether it is a persistent or a non-persistent data, then your other structures, right? So whenever you are going to get back the data, you need to some kind of structure to represent that data, right? So then, so all those files will be present in a um, uh, all those will be present in a file called as model. The next thing that we have is basically something called as view, right? So view basically contains all the user interfaces. So our UI is development will take place in the UI. For example, our so UI can be like storyboards, or it can be buttons, or any other, or RxIVs, or UI view will be present there, right? Now the next thing that comes is basically a controller, right? A controller is, so for example, data passing, right? What if you are passing data from one end to the another? So that is basically the job of the controller, right? So controller is basically to control data movement in our UI. So controller is basically um, controlling data movement, right? Because most user interface algorithms are going to be um, like most user interfaces have one-way data passing, right? So we'll see that, and we'll see a little bit on that as well. Now the advantages of MVC is basically it is very simple and intuitive, easy to understand. Now the disadvantage is basically, for example, fat controllers, right? So UI controllers end up doing everything, right? So UI, first of all, there is going to be tight coupling here. So we don't want our logic to be tightly coupled, right? So by tight coupling means if we are trying to add any new feature or any UI element, then the whole code base has to be revamped. So we don't want tight coupling, right? We always go for loose coupling, right? Because we are going to follow the solid principles, right? And it's because it's tightly coupled, it becomes difficult to scale it, right? So it becomes difficult to scale. Then again, testing kind of becomes a bit difficult here. So you can say testing is difficult. So the next kind of architecture that we have is basically something called as MVVC, right? So we have MVVC, right? So this is basically the latest type of architecture that we have. So let's see what does MVVC stand for. Yeah, so the next basically we have is basically called as MVVM, right? So it's not MVVC, MVVM is basically something called as model view, model view, then view model. So basically this is going to stand for model view model, right? Now when we come to model, like um so model is again like uh in my so so in the MVC as well, the job of model was to have the data being kept, right? So same model job is basically to have the data or the business logic that is being present, right? It does not have any UI here. So basically this is going to be all the data, my structs, this is same. Now then next thing that comes is view, right? So view is going to be my user interface. So let's come with view. So view is going to be user interfaces, and then display the data or display text. Now the third is basically view model, right? So view model is basically now view model is going to act as an intermediary between it is basically an intermediary between um model and view, right? So now when we are MVVM is basically we are saying model view model, right? Now MVVM um now MVVM is more so first thing is MVVM, the first advantage is so if there is any in MVC, if there is an UI update, it has to go to the controller, right? So but here there is no so basically here, since we don't have that controller, so the views are automatically going to bind to the data. So view auto binds to the data, right? So we are going to do view auto binds to data. This is the first advantage of MVVM. Now second is basically it is so there we had that fat controller issue, right? So here it's there we don't have any we don't have any issue with that. Now the biggest drawback of MVC was it was not designed to work with SwiftUI, right? However, MVVM is inherently designed to work with SwiftUI, or the SwiftUI user interface is kind of built on MVVM, right? Now it's easy to maintain. It has loose, easy to maintain, easy to test. These are basically the advantages, right? So easy to maintain and test. Now let's see some code repositories, right? How, so like whenever we are going to do some, or we are going to do to we are going to upload our code to some repository. So how will our file structure look like? Like what all possible things we'll have, right? So suppose we have made this app, right? So this is our app. So so we have our app code over here. Suppose we are using GitHub as our uh, to put in our code, right? Or to save in our code, or basically we're using our it's like a hosting platform, right? So where we have our code written in there. Now um so how will we be creating files is, so basically first thing that we will do is so first thing is basically, suppose this is our Xcode project, right? So suppose if this is my Xcode project, so this is my Xcode right now. In this I'll be having different things, right? So first is basically I'll be having an asset folder. So this is my asset folder, right? The next thing basically that I have is basically something called as um the next thing that we have is so we are going to do MVVM, right? So MVVM. So first is we will be having another folder which is basically going to be our model, right? So basically this is to um store data, right? So to store data we'll be having our model present here. The next thing that we have is basically we need to have our user interface, so we'll be adding our views over here. So for views we are going to create another project, so another folder, right? So this is where our views are going to come and be placed. The next thing that we or the next thing that we have is basically something called as um, the next thing that we basically have is something called as view model, right? So this is basically our interface in between the in between our use and data, right? So we need to have that between thing. Now we also suppose we have some assets file, right? For example, we are going to do create, we are you going to use an image, right? So those are going to be in our image folder. So this is basically the image assets that is coming in. So this is image. So this is basically in our um, image folder. uh, s- Now we have something called as preview content, right? So this is not for us. I mean, this is basically that comes in wrapped in with iOS, I guess. Now there is something called as extensions as well, right? I mean, so and then we have something called as plist. So plist is basically your configuration. For example, you have your API key, right? So you want so you don't want all the users to have access to that. So yeah, info plist is where we are going to have our configurations. This is just like a file, like info.plist. So this is where we will be storing our API keys. So the anytime, so the moment you're dealing with API, you need to follow three things, right? First is you need the link, right? So it will be like an URL, and then you need to authenticate yourself. So that for that you need to generate a key, right? Now based if it's a public or private, this key can be either it will cost you or it will be free, right? And then what you need to do is you need to insert the key in the URL. So insert the key in the URL. So there are parameters that are we going to have to this URL. Okay. So that key is basically where we are going to store in info playlist. So this is this key for authentication. So we'll be generating a key, right? So this key will be present in uh, this key will be present in our playlist, right? Okay. And okay, so then we have something. Okay, the app.delegate, that is not our thing. That's like that's okay. So now, okay, images we don't put directly into an image folder. It's generally put in an asset folder. So images you will be attaching to an asset folder. So this is so images will be in an asset. So instead of image, it will be an asset, right? Now you have something called as extension. So this is like mm, no. So what do we write? For example, if you are adding any custom methods or something like that, you will try to add that in extension. For example, uh, so this is going to contain custom Swift extensions files that enhance or add functionality to existing types. So basically, okay. So yeah, so in addition to this, one we have uh we have an additional folder called as extensions, right? Now, what is going to be present in this extension is basically, suppose if we are adding any additional functionality to a pre-existing method, for example, for example, to string. So if you are adding additional functionality to a pre-existing type. So if you are adding additional functionality to a pre-existing type, then we would be using extension header. For example, pre-existing could be strings. For example, UI color, date time format, uh, our date time and format. Yeah, for example, date time. Yeah, date time. Basically, these are already pre-existing, right? So these are pre-existing. We are just going to extend them a new behavior. So pre-existing, and by extension, we are going to add in some additional behaviors. So adding additional behavior. Okay. Then um, do we have anything else? Okay, so in view is okay. That is Yeah, that's okay. And then app.delegate, so that is something related to, I guess that's um, so that is basically so using app delegate and scene delegate you can so the Swift UI goes through different phases, right? So um, you can like we can monitor those phases as well. So whenever you have a user, it goes to different phases, right? So for example, all the UI user level lifecycle events, right? So if there is any lifecycle, for example, push notification, okay, and then you have, so I mean not all app will have, so this will depend. So I have something called as app.delegate, app.delegate.swift, and scene delegate. So scene delegate is for UI. So this UI lifecycle. So this app delegate dot swift. This is for application lifecycle. So you are going to monitor the application uh, lifecycle over here in this file. And then you have one more which is basically called as scene delegate, right? So scene delegate is going to monitor user interface UI monitoring, right? Because basically this is going to UI lifecycle. So we are going to monitor the user interface lifecycle. So yeah, this is all the basic files that any repo or any code will have. So just to recap, so the main ones are yeah, basically first will be following the MVVM architecture, right? So the first is we are going to do the MVVM, right? So model view model, right? So we are going to have one folder for model, one for uh, our views, and then one is for our view model, right? So and then we are going to have add in assets. So assets is coming over here. For example, it can be any asset, like for example color or something peculiar to that. And then we have info.list. For example, this might contain our API keys and other information. There are two additional so there is one more additional called as extensions, right? So extension folder is basically to so this is basically to add additional functionality. So this is basically to add additional functionalities, right? So here we are going to add in our additional functionalities inside the extensions. For example, you have string, you have date time. So if you need to add some additional functionalities, you're going to add in there. The next thing that we have is app delegate dot save time. So app delegate is for app lifecycle, scene delegate is for UI lifecycle, and then we have yeah, I guess that's all. So basically this is all scene related lifecycle management, right? Not yeah. Uh, for example, window or one scene or you have multiple scenes. So that management is going to be done over here. So I guess yeah, that is all for this session. So in Swift UI, is everything done automatic? So in uh so UI in Swift UI, the job of this UI mounting is all um uh like the Swift UI itself is so we are going to directly so like yeah, so we are going to directly monitor it. I mean, there is no in when you're using Swift UI, we don't need any we don't have like a special lab delegate. That is basically some other UI framework. But then yeah, just to like just to give you an overall what is and how it's going to look. Okay, so that's all for this session. I hope you guys liked it. I will see you guys in the next one, and please subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you guys in the next one, and then we'll try revising some UI, and then we will move on. That's all for this session. See you guys in the next one. Till that time, take care.